I'm happy to have Christian Miller on Character and the Common Good. Professor Miller is currently the A.C. Reed Professor of Philosophy at Wake Forest University, and his research primarily focuses on contemporary ethics as well as issues in philosophy of religion. In particular, in recent years, he's done a lot of work at the intersection of philosophy and psychology, especially as those things relate to issues of character. In our interview today, we talk about the ways that you can cultivate virtue, different strategies that are at least moderately successful, some more than others perhaps. We also have a special focus, given his recent work, on the virtue of honesty and then how to cultivate and grow in that. So I hope you find the interview useful. I think it's full of really practical strategies if you want to be intentional about cultivating character. One side note, I didn't realize that the timestamp button was pressed, so I apologize for that. But other than that, hope you enjoy the video. Thanks. Well, thanks, Christian, for taking the time to come talk on the channel today about character and some of your work on it. We appreciate it.
It's really great to see you, and I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. So we're going to focus in on sort of really the topic of cultivating virtue, and then a little bit we'll talk more about particularly the virtue of honesty. So as I've mentioned, I've used Christian's book, The Character Gap, in my class ethics courses for many years. It's been really good. And I guess let's just start there. In that book, you have actually three different chapters discussing this issue of how to cultivate virtue and some of those things. One of those chapters talks about some more promising strategies for character growth. And so I was wondering if you could maybe explain one or two of those strategies.
So this is against the backdrop of two assumptions. One is that most of us are not virtuous. And so it's be a little different conversation if we thought, oh, we've already made it, so we're already virtuous people. And then the second assumption is that we can move our character. So our character is not fixed or set in stone. We have some control over it and we can reshape it over time, although probably slowly and gradually. It's no magical solutions here. So you said one or two strategies. So one strategy is looking to role models and exemplars. So people who actually have succeeded, or at least done a lot better than I have. So they're further along the path to virtue, and I can look to their lives and not just admire them at a distance, but admire them in such a way that I'm inspired to become more like them. So I'm moved both intellectually, but also emotionally to have my character better reflect their character as opposed to bringing their character down to my level. And these can be historical exemplars. These can be contemporary ones. They can be fictional. They can be real people. But there seems to be empirical research that a couple of factors matter. Things like whether they're relatable to me or not. That makes a big difference. And whether they're attainable or not, or at least thought to be attainable. So if you have someone who's really so far above me, I could get discouraged and not even bother trying to emulate them. And if I don't really have anything in common with them, that's not going to help either. So relatable, attainable exemplars, seeking those people out and then following them and their example is one idea. Just to mention another strategy, I call it getting the word out. And it means basically just greater self-awareness. So it starts by looking not to other people, but into our own minds, in our own souls or psychologies, wherever you want to put it, and thinking reflectively about how we're doing when it comes to virtue. And thinking, okay, where are the areas I need to improve? Where are the areas I'm probably doing okay? And then along that path, having resources to help me gain that greater self-awareness of how my character is. So looking to recent work in science, looking at recent work in psychology, looking at recent work on character and virtue development, and understanding that there are probably some psychological obstacles that are holding me back that we might not be very aware of, but that we're getting better understanding of over time. So to make that a little bit less abstract, 50 years ago, there were a whole bunch of experiments on the effects of being in a group and how if you're in a group, you're much less likely to help other people. And then psychologists unpack that in terms of the role of fear of embarrassment, which can hold us back from helping even in times of emergency. Well, now we understand this. We have names for it. We call it the group effect. We call it the bystander effect. There's training for this. And so we gain greater awareness of this aspect of our psychology, this fear of embarrassment that might have not helped us act compassionately, but we can work against it and try to not have it be so impactful in keeping us from being a compassionate person. So 2 strategies to sum it up. Then there are others, but to keep it limited, role models and gaining greater self-awareness.
Yeah, those are good. I think, for people that want to check it out more, obviously they can get your book, The Character Gap, which it's not an academic book. It's for normal people. And Christian didn't know he was going to pump his book here, but yeah, so it's priced reasonably. It's very readable. My students love it. And I learn from it every time we go through it. So yeah, a lot more there. In the last chapter of that book, you talk about the question of the relation of religious faith and character development a little bit, and you use Christianity sort of as a test case, basically, for some of the ideas from psychology and philosophy throughout the book. So I guess I'm just curious, what are some particular strategies for character growth that people of faith might use? And of course, there's going to be some overlap among different religions. So, but either particularly Christian or just more general that could be helpful.
Right. It's great. So the reason I did that was that look, most of the world is religious in some shape or form. And the major world religions have so much to offer when it comes to virtue and character. All of them stress the importance of these ideas. All of them have practical tips about how to cultivate a good character. So I think it would just be a shame to neglect all those resources. But I didn't want to do it really piecemeal, going from religion to religion to religion in 5 pages for each. So I chose to dive deeper into Christianity, but at the same time, making the point that many of the observations that I'm offering there generalize to other religions. They're not specific just to Christianity. Nor am I saying that Christianity is the only way to become a good person. So I want to be real upfront about that too. I think you could even be an atheist, agnostic practitioner of a variety of different faiths, and be a very, very virtuous person. So having said those things, one thing I stress is the value of religious practices. So it's immersing yourself in the day-to-day and week-to-week routines of the religion can have beneficial impacts for character, even if that's not the goal of those practices. So in the Christian case, prayer is a religious practice that Christians engage in or are supposed to engage in. And that can increase things like humility, it can increase compassion and other virtues, even if that's not what you're praying for. It can be a byproduct or side effect of the practice. By humbling yourself, implicitly asking for a higher being for help and assistance, you're exhibiting humility and hopefully growing in humility in the process. Same thing with something like fasting. That's can foster temperance. Tithing and donating to the church can foster compassion and generosity. Again, these may not be the purpose of the practice, but they can have indirect impacts on our character. And I also frame this in terms of not just the individual Christian or religious believer more generally, but the religious believer immersed in a social context. So for the Christians, it's embedded in the church. Christians are members of the church, capital C and lowercase c. So a body of believers, a community of other followers of Jesus. And that matters for a whole variety of reasons. One is that it offers support. So if I'm struggling, I have others around me who can support me. It also provides some examples and exemplars, like we already talked about, people who have gone farther along on the path, and I can look to them. It is a source of advice and guidance. It can even be a source of discipline to help me when I'm kind of straying away from the path of virtue. Others can say, hold on. I think you need to maybe examine your life in this regard a little bit more. So 2 points, and I'll end with a third one. The first one was social practices and religious rituals. The second one is in a social context. That's all human-centered. That's all, what can I do in my community? What can we do? There's a strand of thinking in Christianity where we're supposed to invite in the help of God. And this may not be specific to Christianity. Other religions can also call upon a higher being or divine being for help with character development. In the way it works out in the Christian context, it's very specific to the idea of a Trinity, where God is Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and we won't get into much of the details of that, but that one person of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit, can actually come alongside the believer and help in the process of character development. And we can call upon that Holy Spirit to aid us in this process. So the point being, it's not just humans beings left to their own devices, it's human beings cooperating with the divine being, collectively working out this process of character improvement, or in the Christian context, sanctification, to become the virtuous person that human beings were designed to be in the first place from a religious perspective.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and like you said, a lot of those practices cut across different faiths. Can be useful. Um, yeah, something recently, well, past couple of years, I've spent a little bit more time reading about the vices, and I know you've read and used a book in class by Rebecca Conduct DeYoung, Glittering Vices, and it's weird, but I've found that to be very helpful as I try to like make slow progress in character development. So, yeah, I guess maybe just from your perspective, your teaching or experience, or just some of the research you've done, in what ways can studying and reflecting on the moral vices, like cowardice or greed or whatever, how can those help us make progress?
Yeah, it's a very intriguing question. It's not one I really thought about much when I wrote the book, and I only came to appreciate it a little bit more later on. I was so kind of focused on the virtues, and it's natural to start there and think about how can I become virtuous. But the vices play into this, even when it comes to growing in virtue. I think in a number of ways. One is by gaining better understanding of a vice, I might be able to use that to help check myself. So if I gain a better understanding of what dishonesty involves, then I can ask, how am I doing? Am I closer to the honesty side, or am I closer to the dishonesty side? If I gain a greater understanding of temperance and intemperance, same thing. How am I doing? It's like it can be a benchmark or a way to measure where I am. I think it can also help us. Okay, once I have a better understanding of what a vice is and a virtue, it can help me also benchmark my progress. How am I doing over time? Am I becoming better? Am I moving away from what a vice is and closer to a virtue? Well, let's think about what it looks like to be a virtuous person and a vicious person. So it's assess myself right now, and also keep myself kind of accountable and measure my progress over time. But here's a third idea. This is kind of a different angle on it. Let's go back to that exemplars point. There might be some value in negative exemplars. So, we tend to naturally go, okay, positive exemplars: honesty, Abraham Lincoln; compassion, Harriet Tubman; courage, Martin Luther King Jr. And that's certainly that's the way I was thinking about it. I think there's a lot of value to that. It might be helpful, and I'm just stressing might, to think about also exemplars of vice as foils, or as a way to say, that's who I don't want to be, because look at how awful that person is. I never, people talk about greed, but I've never really appreciated what greed looked like until I studied so and so. Hatred, in the abstract, hatred's a bad thing. But when I look at this person's life and see hatred manifested in how they treated other people, it's so repugnant and so disturbing that I want to do everything I can to not turn out to be like that. So it can be a source of motivation to make sure I don't go down that path and push me in the other path. So yeah, three things come to mind there.
Yeah, that's good. I think too. Yeah, you can have these. Well, it goes back to getting the word out in a different way, the self-knowledge thing. So I've experienced that reading about the vices. I had a student, and I'd known her since she was in fourth grade, so somebody local. But we studied vainglory, and then after class, she was like, "I think I'm vainglorious," and it was just. But she was serious. She was like, "There's a light clip." It's like, oh my god, she didn't realize it. So I think. Yeah, that's one thing I appreciate about your book and some of the other work being done by philosophers and psychologists and others, is trying to get talk about character, thinking about character on the map, not just in the academy, but on the street, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe let's take a turn and look at honesty. I know you've in the past, recent past, done a lot of work on that virtue. Was it? I think I remember this. I think you did a literature review, and there had been no philosophical paper written on honesty for, I want to say, decades. Is that right?
That's in the ballpark. So
yeah,
I worked on the character topic in general, did a lot of academic research on that, published a couple of academic books. Then I did the character gap, which was trying to take those academic ideas to a larger audience. And then once the character gap book was done, I said, well, I've kind of said what I want to say about all this. What else can I do? And I was looking around for topics that were unexplored or at least underexplored having to do with character. And it's striking in the academic world that there are a couple really prominent virtues that people have not paid much attention to. Things like patience, um, generosity, graciousness, and honesty. And I thought to myself, wow, honesty is an incredibly important virtue. And yet there are now here's the number. I could only find 2 papers written on honesty in philosophy in the last 50 years. And the last book was 50 years ago as well. And so basically it was nothing being done on it. And arguably it's one of the top 5 most recognizable and important virtues out there. So here's an opportunity to, say something maybe new or fresh or original, and hopefully get other people to pay attention to it. But even if that means by showing them how I'm wrong, at least people will start paying more attention to it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's do what philosophers do then. Let's start with the definition. How would you define honesty as a virtue?
Yep. So as a virtue, not as just as behavior.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of it as a character trait. It's a virtuous character trait. So I think of virtues as having multiple facets to them. I'm a kind of old school follower of Aristotle in this respect. So I think there's going to be a more thinking or cognitive component to honesty as for every virtue. I think there's going to be more motivational and emotional components to honesty as for every virtue. And then those different components are going to manifest in outward behavior. So I'm going to, if I'm an honest person, act honestly because of my inner honest psychology. So to spell that out a little bit more, let's just do the motivational and the behavioral side. Let's probe that a little bit more. Motivationally, it's not enough just to act well on the outside. You could be doing that for purely self-interested, egoistic reasons. I'm telling the truth because I want to get a promotion. I'm not cheating because I don't want to get fired from my job, or I don't want to fail out of this course because I get caught by the professor. That's just all about me. I think honest motivation has to be not egoistic, but that leaves open lots of possibilities of what form it might take. It could be that it's friendship based, so I don't cheat because this person is my friend. It could be loving or caring based because I care about this other person. It could be dutiful because it's the right thing to not cheat or lie or steal. It could be explicitly honesty motivation. So I'm not going to cheat because it would be the dishonest thing to do to cheat. So honest motivation could take a lot of these different forms. It just can't be egoistic. And then on the behavioral side, the outward expression, I think fundamentally, honesty is an incredibly broad-ranging virtue, covers lots of behavior. It covers lying, it covers cheating, it covers misleading, it covers stealing, promise breaking, BSing, hypocrisy, self-deception, very broad in scope. But if we had to boil it down to a kind of core insight or core aspect of what all these things have in common, an honest person does not intentionally distort the facts as he or she sees them. So it does not, and on purpose, misrepresent the world to him or herself or others, at least as the person sees them. So to say one more comment about that, I'll stop and we can probe it more or go in a different direction. Honesty is tied to how you see the world. It doesn't track the objective truth. It tracks your subjective perception of reality. So you can be an honest person and believe that the earth is flat and say that to others that the earth is flat. If you lived 5,000 years ago, you would still be an honest person, even though that's what you believed is false. And you can be a dishonest person and have true beliefs. So it's interesting that it's one that doesn't have to track the objective truth. It has to track the subjective truth in your communication to others and to yourself.
Yeah. So the idea is you are not intentionally misrepresenting the world, so to speak, as you see it. Right.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And as you see it, though, could be rather different than the way the world really is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's right.
So you can be an honest, take any political position. You can be an honest Democrat, honest Republican, honest Trump supporter, honest Trump opponents. Given the details of the situation, we have to spell it out, the details. But so long as you are accurately representing your perspective to yourself and others, that's fine for me.
Good. Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned something that it's probably one of the 5 most important virtues or something like that. Why is that? Why is honesty so important? I've got that same view, but I haven't really thought about it. It's more just a armchair judgment.
Well, there's the different ways to probe that. One is to actually survey people and ask them, what qualities do you look for in others, and give them a long list. And my team at Wake Forest, I didn't do this research, but some of the psychologists on my team actually did this research, and they gave people a list of 60 different qualities, and they kind of forced them to rank those qualities on the dimension of, what do you like the most in another person? What do you respect the most in another person? What do you want to know the most about another person? In all 3 cases, honesty was at the top out of the 60 qualities. Striking how important it is, at least in those self-report measures. So in those surveys that were done by my team. There are other ways to get at it, though. You might think, well, look, just from a philosophical perspective, honesty is going to promote trust. It's going to promote the good functioning of society. It's going to strengthen relationships. It's going to strengthen friendships. It's going to strengthen marriages and other kind of romantic relationships. It's going to foster healthy attitudes and healthy functioning of one's psychology. So you can argue from a more kind of armchair conceptual perspective for those conclusions. You can also think about the opposite, which is, okay, what happens when there's rampant dishonesty? And when in other words, you can appreciate the value and significance of honesty by seeing what happens when it's not present, and instead you have dishonesty. And one way to get at that is, well, just look at the news every day. Every day there's a big news story having to do with dishonesty, whether it's, just some recent ones, the college admissions scandal, where, the parents were trying to buy their way into, Ivy League schools, or Ashley Madison websites where, hundreds of thousands of people subscribe to this website, facilitating having extramarital affairs, or then pick your famous celebrity who's, cheating in sports, or cheating in a relationship. It's just striking the impact it has when it's not there, or rather, better way to put it is striking the impact that dishonesty has when it's there.
Yeah.
So that's a different way to get at it.
Yeah. So maybe, I guess, a question, because I guess I'm thinking this. So I've talked about this with my students over the years. We start thinking about all the ways you're actually, I guess I would say, trusting people to be honest, like all the things that we just assume every day. I mean, maybe it bleeds over into something like integrity too, but whether it's, the pharmacist actually giving me the right medication or the right dose, to the person who built the chair I'm in and the building we're in. I mean, they're just, I think it just, when you start thinking about all the ways we sort of trust a basic level of honesty across the domains of life, it's remarkable. I mean, I think that, always strikes me.
I'm with you, and without even thinking about it. So I think you're right. It may be honesty, integrity, authenticity. So there are all these notions are kind of blending together probably. But just think about how hard it would be to carry out our daily interaction if we couldn't trust others. And what is the most important basis for that trust? Mutual honesty. If mutual honesty erodes, trust erodes, communication and exchange will erode, and our daily lives will be immeasurably more difficult. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's make, I guess, in sort of a more, not more practical, but where it hits everyday life, what are some things that people can do to cultivate this virtue? Like, are there ways to be intentional about it? I mean, I guess, of course, telling the truth is maybe an obvious one, but sometimes that's hard, right? Depending on the situation. Right. So how can we, I guess, the question is, how can we become more honest people? What are some things people might be able to do?
And just a quick comment on the telling the truth. That alone well, it's not sufficient for being honesty. For being honest, we talked about the internal motivation and so forth. We also talked about how wide-ranging the virtue is. So you have to also think about cheating and promise keeping and so forth. But there's also an interesting aspect that telling the truth is compatible with dishonesty. So you can be a truth teller, reliable truth teller who's misleading. You tell the truth in such a way you try to get people to draw a false conclusion. So there's even more. It's surprisingly nuanced and complicated virtue. But to speak directly to the question, well, one thing that you could do is just say, take the general strategies and apply them to honesty. So whatever the general strategies are for virtue, we're just going to kind of plug in the word honesty and then churn out a methodology or an approach. And I think that's fair. But let's kind of pay attention a little bit more to the details of honesty. So what I like to do is look to the empirical literature to see how we're doing. And that's a long story. But the upshot of the story is, well, most of us are not honest. But also, how are we doing psychologically if we're not honest? Two things that have really emerged in the psychological literature that I'll highlight here are, on the plus side, most people believe that something like cheating is wrong, lying is wrong, stealing is wrong. And so I think we want to focus on enhancing the power of that belief. On the other hand, most people also want to cheat, lie, or steal if they think they can get away with it and not get caught, and it's of significant value to them. So you have these two factors, and there's more to it. There are more factors, but I'm just highlighting these two. A positive one that I think we want to enhance, a negative one that we want to weaken. So take them one by one. How can we enhance that positive one? Well, it's a belief, that cheating is wrong, lying is wrong, stealing is wrong, at least in most cases. Maybe there are a couple exceptions. What we want to do, I think, is make those more psychologically salient. It's not that we need to be educated in those truths. We know them, but oftentimes they are repressed or not conscious, or they're being outweighed by other competing motivation. So we want to get them to be more psychologically robust. And here I would call attention to two things. One, exemplars again. So this is a concrete way that exemplars can be helpful. They can, provide us those examples of people who are living their lives around the belief that cheating is wrong, lying is wrong, stealing is wrong, and so forth. And so that can, function to inspire us to do the same. But secondly, a new idea we haven't mentioned, which is more reminders. So having in our lives reminders of the importance of being honest, so that belief in the wrongness of these actions is called to mind and is psychologically salient. In my to make this a little bit more concrete, in my educational environments and maybe in yours too, we have an honor code at our school where for every test I make my students sign our university's honor code before taking the test. In fact, I go one step further and I make them verbally recite it with me out loud before they sign it. And what I hope that's doing, and there's some empirical evidence that supports this, is that it's functioning as a moral reminder to call to mind what they already value and make it fresh in their minds before they take the test, which will make it a lot harder for them to turn around and cheat. Doesn't make it impossible, but it makes it harder. And there are studies that back this up. Last thing, then, sorry for the long answer, but so we want to strengthen the positive part. And I also said we want to weaken as much as we can the negative part being our desire and our motivation to cheat, say, or steal if we think we can get away with it, not get caught, it benefits us. We want to weaken that desire. There's no pill we could take, at least yet. Maybe there will be in the future to get rid of desires like that. But there are a couple of things that we can keep in mind. One is there's punishment. Now, that's a word that probably is going to make people uncomfortable. But there's some value to increasing penalties associated with cheating, say in the educational context, as a disincentive to cheat, or stealing from the company in the corporate context as a disincentive to steal from the company. So it's not going to be motivationally the best kind of motivation. I'm going to not do this because I don't want to get punished. I don't want to get kicked out of school or kicked out of the company, but it's better than nothing. And then secondly, and I'll end with this, whatever I think we can do to foster greater love and care and compassion for others will pay dividends in this context too. So the greater extent that I love others and care about them, the harder it's going to be to want to cheat them. So there's a way in which other virtues can come alongside here. And if we can strengthen those other virtues, that will have kind of spillover effects on honesty too, in terms of weakening our desire to help, to cheat or take advantage of other people. So
yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, that's good. And yeah, loving, caring for others. That's a good thing to end on. So we'll do that.
Okay.
But yeah, that was really helpful. I like that a lot. Thanks, Christian. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me today.
No, thanks for your interest, and it's great to be with you.
All right, you too.